Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Director of the FDD's Iran program. Behnam, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Great to be back with you, Brittany.
You and I were speaking at the beginning of June, just about 2 weeks ago, and the tenor of the conversation was very different. At the time, we were talking about details of a potential nuclear deal between the US and Iran, and a lot has changed since that moment. Last week, we saw Israel launch a series of strikes on Iran's nuclear and military sites, and since then, we've seen an escalation in the attacks between the two countries. So, to start off the conversation, can you characterize the moment we see ourselves in right now?
Well, the moment we are in right now is nothing short of historic. The brief creeping up and out of the shadow war between Israel and Iran for the past 4 decades that we saw in 2024 into an overt hot war has come out now in June of 2005 and stayed out there in a sustained fashion. We are now essentially in day six, six and a half, depending on how you count, of an overt Israel Iran war. The Israelis took preemptive military action against Iran's nuclear program, missile military apparatus, parts of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps strategic brain trust, as well as targeted some of Iran's military nuclear scientists that were aiding this program. So, this strike, in terms of its operational capacity, given the fact that it was married with a significant intelligence component on Iranian territory, given the fact that the Israelis have been able to maneuver around what was left of Iran's air defenses and have consistently been taking out a whole constellation of military facilities and bases and radars on the regime's west and moving further into the center, really do show that we have the makings of a much larger conflict here underway. And the Israelis are trying to turn off the conflict as quickly as they're turning it on because their eyes are on two things. One, making sure the regime's nuclear program can be fully destroyed or meaningfully set back. And the other is to really restrict or even destroy the ability of the Islamic Republic to fire medium range ballistic missiles capable of reaching Israel from Iranian territory should this continue to go on.
You said that there's a potential here for a much larger conflict, and you said it's the Israel Iran war. I am curious, and a lot of Americans are curious, if it's going to be the Israel US Iran war, because President Trump was asked if the United States is moving closer to launching a strike on Iranian nuclear sites. And this is what he said on Wednesday morning, quote, "I may do it, I may not do it. Nobody knows what I'm going to do." He also added, "Iran's got a lot of trouble." I mean, what's the timing of this? Because it seemed like the United States was on the path of diplomacy just a few weeks ago. Why the sudden change?
Well, some may say that the path has never really changed. The Islamic Republic had a window, according to President Trump, allegedly 60 days, to negotiate in good faith, and it stalled and it dragged out the conversation. And the Israelis struck right after that window had closed. So, no doubt there was Israeli preemptive military action. But Donald Trump, who has been remarkably consistent on A, his desire to prevent an Iranian nuclear weapon, as well as B, his desire to get some kind of a diplomatic resolution, may even see limited or even more expansive Israeli military means as the potential driver or pathway to an ultimate larger diplomatic end. I mean, even as the president on social media was hinting that he could threaten the supreme leader of Iran's life, he was also calling for surrender. And most wars, even the wars that end in surrender, have a piece of paper or a diplomatic component tied into it. And I think the president might have his eyes on potentially that.
And I want to read some striking different messaging choices from the United States because the night that Israel launched their initial attack on Iran, this is what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in part. Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self defense, and then he added, "Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel." So it seemed like Rubio was trying to distance the United States from Israel's attack. But on social media over the past couple of days, President Trump has adopted a different tone. He's been using the word we in quite a few posts. I'll read a few. "We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran," meaning we, US and Israel, "and we know exactly where the so called supreme leader is hiding." What does that change in tone indicate to you about where President Trump's head is at and where the United States' involvement really looks like going forward?
Well, Before we try to split the royal we and see who is using it where and why, I think we have to address the current U.S. role in this, which is reportedly helping with the track, detect, and destroy operation that comes with making sure most of Iran's ballistic missiles do not get to make through both Israel's layered air and missile defenses as well as land-based, because there is the THAAD, U.S. defense, U.S. Ballistic missile defense battery on Israeli territory, as well as of Aegis-enabled missile defense destroyers in the sea, probably in the Eastern Mediterranean, that are also helping currently detect, track, and destroy these incoming Iranian ballistic missile barrages. And I think the change in the tone, even though the US, in my view, is not an offensive participant in this campaign, is driven by the multiple rounds. I mean, according to Iranian media themselves, there have been at least 11 Iranian direct ballistic missile barrages, almost nuclear capable ballistic missile systems launched at Israeli civilian population centers. And no doubt the Israelis are continuing to target this capability, but the Iranians also continue to respond. So, one reason I actually see a potential change in the US posture and political rhetoric coming from the president is they're seeing the Iranian willingness to keep fighting, to keep expanding, and dangerously to keep literally striking civilian population centers. And that, I think, could also be driving some of this conversation.
I know that you said that you don't see the United States on the offensive as of now, but what do you think the US involvement looks like going forward? Do you think there is a national appetite for boots on the ground in the Middle East, in Iran, American boots on the ground? Does America want to put itself and directly insert itself into another war in the Middle East?
Well, naturally, every American president has won and has tried to act on things that they were voted for. And no American really wins votes, particularly in the post 9/11 and post Iraq War Middle East, of campaigning to do more in the Middle East. But the reality is for every president, for for Obama, for Trump, for Biden, who have promised to do less, the reality of the region has required them to do more. The real fact is that the US has assets and interests and even elements of its security at stake in this critical part of the world. And that's why, despite three very different men promising all the same thing, they have had to walk it back given many of those regional realities. No one is at all calling for, or even, I think, even needing, from some of the most hawkish voices, boots on the ground. This is a debate between three different sets of military options that the president is keeping his cards very close to the chest on. Option number one is for the U.S. to watch, wait, and do nothing to continue to help with the track, detect, and destroy operations for when it comes to Iranian ballistic missile barrages. And then only when, if attacked or when attacked by the Iranians, to respond against the Iranians who attack them. So if Iran widens the war, then America will go on the offensive. But until Iran widens it, the US lays low. That's Group A. Group B is saying, why don't you go and make the main reason for the Israeli strike, the counterproliferation offensive, the strikes against Iran's nuclear program, successful by going after the very hardened, heavily defended, and buried facilities, some of them like Fordo, almost under 300 feet of rock. Why don't you go and strike that with the heavy bombers and the massive ordnance penetrator and the other bunker busters that you have? And this is a mission that would be easier, considerably, given that Israel has dealt with much of Iran's layered air and missile defenses. So that's option B, just a counterproliferation. Option C is to really kind of dice things up and to really play on what some of the president has been saying, which is to go potentially for a decapitation operation or to move Israel towards striking more political targets that potentially hints at a drastically different order. None of these, I repeat, none of these has required or would require US boots on the ground. However, we have to be honest that the Iranians would try to respond in every single case, but also in every single case, America conventionally has the upper hand.
And to that point of a potential Iranian response, Iran's supreme leader said that any US strike would be met with serious, irreparable consequences. Read the tea leaves for us there. What type of threat is that?
This is, in my view, a threat that the regime has slowly been setting the stage to make. Late over the weekend and early this week, the regime has talked about leaving the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. They've talked about closing or mining the Strait of Hormuz, where much international commerce, particularly energy trade, goes through. And now I think this most latest threat by the supreme leader of Iran is aimed at making America fear for or worry about its regional military posture, particularly the constellation of bases that exist in Iraq as well as in the GCC states, the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. And remember, it was stories about America downsizing its embassy in parts of this part of the world on Thursday that really tipped off on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, of last week. That really tipped off watchers that there may be conflict coming. So Iran's most likely response would be to use actually more precise ballistic missiles at shorter ranges against some of these facilities.
And when we talked at the beginning of June, we were talking about the nuclear deal between Iran and the United States that resembled the JCPOA. And we were talking about how the United States had a few rounds of talks with Iran. They were supposed to enter the sixth round last weekend. Iran did call that off. Do you think, as of now, there's zero chance for a diplomatic solution at this point between Iran and the United States?
Well, there could be one so long as the Supreme Leader of Iran is willing to do what he could have done peacefully, which was to dismantle his nuclear program, cease enrichment, turn this program over, submit to full inspections, and then on the back end of that, earn civil nuclear power. But now there's a shooting war going on. The Islamic Republic is trying to kill civilians. The Islamic Republic is literally threatening the US now. The US has not even joined the conflict, and there are threats against it. So it certainly raises the bar. I say that diplomatic off ramps right now, perhaps within the next week, may not meaningfully be on the table or may not practically be on the table. But I think the Islamic Republic understands that it's outgunned. Just a day and a half ago, in a reformist newspaper in Iran, they were calling for pushing the central government towards accepting some kind of ceasefire or seeking some kind of diplomatic mediation. There was a story that the Iranians came out and said was false over the weekend, but the story was that the Iranians had been trying to reach out indirectly and informally to some of the Qataris or to some Cypriots to try to foster de-escalation with Israel. There was a story on Monday in a diaspora outlet allegedly talking to a senior Iranian diplomat that said the Iranians were willing to hit pause on enrichment if the conflict was paused, that they were merely looking for a face-saving exit. The Islamic Republic knows it's outgunned here, and I think it's high time they understand who is the superpower and who is the supplicant. So when the president, if he wants to really go back to the table, he can say to Khamenei, it's dismantle or die.
If they know that they're outgunned right now, and Netanyahu reportedly thought that this was the best time to strike Iran because they are severely weakened, I mean, is this the beginning of the end of this Iranian regime?
It could be. It's not clear at all. It is entirely possible. And an analyst like me who's looked at the conditions under which the regime has made peace before, they've made peace when they know they're outgunned. They certainly fight a lot. They certainly try to respond to pressure with pressure of their own. But once they see pressure is sustained, and once they see that there's no way out but through, that is when this ideological regime, and it's only done this on a handful of times, has chosen to take the knee. And that's because it's choosing to fight to live another day. There's all these questions here of honor. There's all these questions here of hubris. There's all these questions of kind of like a pan-Islamist nationalism, even though this is not a nationalist regime, it's an Islamist regime. But right now it's trying to generate a rally around the flag effect, and it's failing horribly. So it's trying to find new ways to do that, to try to bring the population who has been protesting against it for many years on its own side. So it's really kind of flailing in the wind here. And even though the regime, as you mentioned, does know it's outgunned, there is such a thing as ideology. And the Islamic Republic is living in a world brought to you by the costs of its ideology.
Something both President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agree on is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And there have been videos circulating in recent days of Netanyahu saying since the 90s that Iran is on the brink of having a nuclear bomb, but US intelligence is saying a different timeline. They're saying Iran could be up to 3 years off to having a nuclear weapon, and they are not actively trying to build one. Is Iran close to having a nuclear weapon? What do you make of that?
Iran is already a nuclear threshold state, if not a borderline nuclear threshold state. And any intelligence organization, ours, Israelis, the Europeans, I don't know, Australia, Japan, whoever, can objectively look at the fact that the Islamic Republic of Iran is the only country in the world with this domestic fuel cycle capability that is enriching uranium at this rate, at this quantity, at the 60% purity level, which is highly enriched, that doesn't have the one thing that is the only quote unquote civilian justification for 60%, and that's naval nuclear propulsion. So these guys don't have nuclear powered submarines, but they're enriching uranium to 60%. And uranium enrichment is not linear. It's not like 60% is 60% of the way there. 60% is between 90 to 99% of the way to pure weapons grade, which is 90%. So this regime is doing all of that. And to think that it'll trade it away quickly or cheaply or easily, I think is a mistake, which is, again, back to how I think the president sees this. I think the president sees Iran's atomic infrastructure as something that is very near and dear to them. And that's why I think he may have even been in a world, again, this is my assessment, nothing clear, but he may have been in a world where he pale green lighted the Israeli military action to stop them from being able to have this capability and at this capacity. I think, again, any professional intelligence organization in the world would see the things that make the Islamic Republic's nuclear program unique and then be able to read into the rest of the threats about intentions and capabilities. But just on the Israel-Iran thing, and without going back to Trump being a deal maker or not, last year, according to Axios, both in June and July, the Americans and the Israelis detected activity that had implications for weaponization. Those activities were metallurgy and computer modeling. If you look at even the Obama era nuclear deal, the JCPOA, in the verification section, section T of that agreement, computer modeling is something that is prohibited and is defined as a weaponization like activity. So Iran isn't approaching a nuclear program and a weapons capacity in a structured fashion. It's doing it in a disparate, unstructured fashion. And therein lies the threat.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that President Trump is holding his cards very tightly to his chest. He said, "Nobody knows what I'm going to do." And I think that really rings true. Nobody knows what President Trump's next move is. But you're an expert when it comes to Iran. So, what specifically are you looking out for next?
Well, I'm looking for the president to tip his hand because, as much as the president wants to be in the position where all eyes are on him, he does also telegraph his intentions. And I think this is one area where he's been remarkably consistent. I'm looking for the Iranians to try to see if that they will do some of the things now or in the near future as they've done in the past, which is to create the political space to either take the knee and to pause and live to fight another day, or how they continue to fight the next round of the conflict with the Israelis. You see, for instance, the Iranians having to fire ballistic missiles from deeper in their territory because they've lost a whole series of bases or military constellations in the western part of their country. I'm looking for how the Iranians may think that they can win or leverage or play a game of chicken with President Trump by issuing more and more threats and trying to see who blinks or who moves first. So much of this is happening in real time that we'll all be finding out together.
Behnam Ben Taleblu, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you, Brittany. Always a pleasure.